The Association of the United States Army is pleased to welcome you to AUSA's Noon Report webinar series. This webinar series features presentations by senior Army leaders responsible for key programs and initiatives. It also features contemporary military authors who weave together the past, present, and future story of the United States Army. Kicking off today's webinar is Lieutenant General Retired Patricia McQuistion, an AUSA Senior Fellow.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the Association of the United States Army's Noon Report. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. We appreciate your support as partners in the defense of our nation. Today's webinar is brought to you by our three-star sponsor, Ethos, the first AI-powered human readiness platform for mission-critical success. This afternoon, we're happy to have Arthur T. Coumbe with us to talk about his new book, Soldiers in the Schoolhouse, A Military History of the Junior ROTC. Dr. Coumbe is a retired Army colonel who served a 30-year career as a military intelligence officer. He's a graduate of the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. He also received a doctorate from Duke University. Among his many assignments, he served as the command historian for the U.S. Cadet Command, U.S. Army Cadet Command, which I'm certain gave you many insights into the day's topic. Yeah. So if you'd like to purchase a signed copy of Soldiers in the Schoolhouse, please click on the pop-up in the bottom left corner of your screen. Please take advantage of having Dr. Coumbe with us here today to ask questions. You can use the Q&A tab on the right side of your screen to submit a question. After the discussion that we're going to have here, we'll take as many questions as we possibly can. You can also find a full bio for Dr. Coumbe in the Handouts tab. I want to start by saying, Dr. Coumbe, how much I enjoyed the book from the very beginning, the dedication, and I quote here, for the untold thousands of students, instructors, and administrators who have taken part in one of the largest, most enduring, most popular, and most controversial experiments in domestic action ever undertaken by the military services. And to my wife, Deborah Coumbe, to the very end of the acknowledgments where you once again thank your wife for her research assistance, her prodigious typing, and her enduring support. So my first question is, would you like to say anything more about how you worked together to produce this military history of Junior ROTC in America, and what motivated you to write this history?
Well, we worked together on a daily basis. She's the one that typed up the notes, and I took the notes and put them into my narrative. So it was a very close relationship. She went to the archives with me. She looked through the documents. She photographed the documents. So she played a major role in processing. I got interested in this, obviously, when I was the historian for the Cadet Command at Fort Monroe at the time. And I wanted to take a fresh approach. Most studies of the JROTC are either from an educational perspective or from a social policy perspective. They do things like measure outcomes, graduation rates, GPAs, enlistment rates, or they analyze militarism, or they look into the curriculum or funding. And all these are very important things. But they all start essentially at the low level, at the classroom level, and then work up. I flipped the script on that, and I started at the top, the national policy level, asking why military and civilian leaders, how they've used JROTC to accomplish national priorities. In other words, I wanted to take JROTC and place it into its into the evolution of U.S. military policy as a whole. I might add to that when I was looking at JROTC, I used three instruments. One we've talked about is it's disciplinary, it's a military history, put it within the evolution of U.S. military institutions. A strategic approach, looking how leaders use the JROTC to build social cohesion and national resistance, and a contextual lens that looked at how the JROTC fit into the history of the long evolution and long history of domestic engagement in the U.S. Army. It started right after the revolution, and from the very start, they were involved, the military services, in a variety of activities, exploring the frontier, mapping new lands. The Navy was charting the ocean for commercial and military purposes. The Army was involved in agricultural initiatives, weather forecasting, medical research, and of course it was the military that played a major role in building our infrastructure, the road and railroad system, and the canal system, in the system of dams that we have today. That's right. But a lesser known aspect of that in domestic engagement was education, and not only education for soldiers, but education of civilians. On many frontier forts, the post hosted the only school around. If the frontier settlements didn't have an Army post, then their kids probably didn't get education. So that was one big area. Also, they worked at educating Native Americans. You know, they gave them academic, vocational training. The idea was to assimilate them into society so they'd become, productive citizens, so they'd give them a chance. And after the Civil War, the Army was involved in the Reconstruction. The freed slaves had to be educated. The displaced Southerners, many of them which were poor, had to be educated. So they started school systems, in some cases public school systems. And today, many of the Southern states really can trace their history back to Army schools started during the Civil War.
Yeah.
So that was a very big part of the whole military domestic engagement scene.
And there hadn't been a history for the entire period of Junior ROTC done yet.
Well, that's another reason. That's another thing. And again, it was spotty. When people wrote about it, they wrote about their own particular perspective. Now, I chose the perspective of, I call it national security, because national security involves military readiness, but it also involves everything else, to STEM education, to social cohesion, to national resilience. Without a strong society, you can't have a strong military. And maybe it's always been relevant, but maybe now when we're going back to near peer conflict, it might be more relevant than ever.
Interesting. So, I wanted to mention that you also give a big shout out to Joe Craig, who's AUSA's director for the book program, and for all the assistance he provided. And I wanted to say he's an absolute treasure, and I want to recognize his efforts for you and all the other authors he supports.
He had the unfortunate task of reading many of my manuscripts and giving me detailed feedback. And it couldn't have been a pleasant experience for him, but
he thrives on that.
Yes.
Well, I would guess that more people are familiar with senior ROTC programs in universities. And your book, again, focused on the history of the junior ROTC in high schools. And according to my AI-enabled research, there are about 26,000 high schools, private and public, in the United States. 1,700 of them have junior ROTC programs with around 314,000 students. Does that sound about?
With all the services now, my last figure was about 500,000.
Oh, so it's grown. Okay. Yeah. As many good things do, ROTC started in the Army. You cite that the National Defense Act of 1916 started the Reserve Officer Training Corps with the 2 divisions, each targeting a distinct branch of the educational system, the university system, colleges, and the high school system. The junior division was rooted in secondary schools with much more diffuse focus. And then the program was expanded to all the services in 1964. So the Army had it for most of its history.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, the Navy did have a few private schools, but no, the JROTC, you're correct, it's 64.
It was open to women in 1972, and in recent years, it's grown again to include the U.S. Space Force.
Yes, I might add, is for the technical specialists out there, they did let them in 72, but they only got counted in enrollment in 73. And some people see that as a big distinction. But yes, it was 72.
Okay. So one description states that Junior ROTC is designed to instill the values of citizenship, service to the United States, and personal responsibility and a sense of accomplishment. So is it correct to say that Junior ROTC is really about character development and not primarily about military service? So how would you describe the program's intent and results?
Well, I get that. The question is JROTC a military program or a social program? Well, the answer is both, because you can't have a strong military without a strong society behind it. Now, this idea was really prevalent in the interwar period, right when the AEF returned from Europe. They had just fought World War I, and they were very aware of how societal support was necessary for a strong army. And so what they did was consciously go out and try to improve through JROTC that bond between the military and society. And they did that through education, tell them what the Army was all about, connections. The instructors during that time were described as ambassadors for the Army in the community. And also they normalized civil-military relations, because with the presence of a JROTC, the JROTC, or the military, was no longer this monster machine back in Washington, D.C. Now it had a face to it. It was no longer distant and abstract like it was. Now it was a program that taught kids all these various things. Now, the other part of your question about teaching citizenship, well, the problem with it is, from a certain perspective, is that the traits and characteristics that make a good soldier also make a good citizen. Personal responsibility, discipline, punctuality, a service ethos, all of those things cement character. But they also are military traits. So, they are also military traits. And they are traits that are just as central to the military as they are to the civilian. I mean, any healthy society needs these traits. They need to be disciplined. Respect for authority and all these things is absolutely needed. So when you're talking about national security, character versus military, really, this character training is just, character training and military preparedness are just different sides of the same coin. So they're very, very closely interrelated. The people that came back from World War I understood that if you don't have a cohesive society, things tend to fall apart. And they had the Austro-Hungarian Empire as a prime example, because most historians would attribute its demise and its defeat in World War I to their lack of social strength and cohesion.
Right. So your book describes a great historical perspective, era by era. And you take us all through the history, not only of JROTC, but the development of the U.S. educational system. And so many historical figures who were involved and who weighed in on the benefits of Junior ROTC in secondary education. People like Henry Knox, George Clinton, Alexander Hamilton, William Henry Harrison, all through history. But the interesting thing, I did not know this until I read your book, that the philosophical roots for ROTC can be traced back to Captain Aldridge Parker at what is present-day Norwich University, that's General Sullivan's alma mater, as a counterpoint to West Point's elitism. So can you talk a little bit about what led Partridge to develop the program at Norwich to counterbalance West Point?
Well, I think he was a little bit too, how should I say, progressive is a bad word, but he believed very strongly in the citizen soldier concept. He was a pronounced Whig, or back then you could call him a Republican, in the sense that he was one of those people that believed in Republican values, freedom of the press. He disliked monarchy and dictatorial rule. He believed in representative government, and most of all, he feared a standing army. So he wanted to have a military academy that built a citizen soldier officer. But that comes with a wrinkle, because his idea of building citizenship involved military training. Military training not only so his graduates would go out and take part in the militia, but it was good for its own sake. He wanted to make community leaders and good citizens and productive citizens. And he thought that military training engendered those traits we just talked about, the discipline, the loyalty, the personal responsibility, the teamwork. And so he was basically JROTC before the JOPC period. Now, a lot of his people were what today we would call college students. But back then, the grade,
age,
yes. So you can say that he was the grandfather, I think, without much exaggeration, of the JROTC, or at least the original grandfather.
I'm going to go one more question, then we'll go to the audience here. So 110 years of history, and the book just encapsulates so many highs and lows, and it's always moving. The program is growing, or it's declining, or it's challenged with so many different resource allocation problems. But you talked about so many periods of great popularity and periods when it was not well supported. One notable period was in the early 1960s, as Robert McNamara, then Secretary of Defense, instituted massive reforms across the department. And one of his many cost savings measures was the elimination of JROTC, whose cost at that time was $6 million per year. So what happened with that?
Well, when he introduced it, he was met with a deluge of protest. Parents, teachers, mayors, big city mayors wrote to the Congress and to the Pentagon saying, we don't want this. This is stupid. We need to reverse this move. He called the services in, and quite frankly, two of the services said, well, it's pretty good. And the Navy didn't want it, because it said, hey, we're strained for manpower. It does take away from us. But anyway, they were overridden by popular demand and a bunch of very adamant and feisty senators that stepped in. One was Congressman E. Edward Hebert from Louisiana, and the other one, a Democrat. And the other one was Richard Russell, a Democrat of Georgia. And they held a series of congressional hearings to say that, to tell McNamara that this wasn't going to be possible. So after this, and what they did was McNamara was very, very interested in reforming the 1964 Vitalization Act, in revitalizing the ROTC, the senior program in colleges, because they needed officers for Vietnam. So what they did, these two senators, especially Hebert, said, okay, if you're not going to expand the JROTC, which is fully supportive of our war effort, we're not going to pass the 1964 Vitalization Act. So they had McNamara over a barrel. He did try to, even when he gave in, he still was not on board with this plan, but in the end, he had to sign it, or else he would have lost the Vitalization Act. So anyway, that was the basic story with that, and it was public outcry that really did it.
Yeah. One of the questions from the audience that we see up there is, how do you see Junior ROTC changing over the next 2 to 3 years? Will STEM, drones, etc., become a larger draw for new cadets?
Well, that is a very good point. Now, I'll tell you right there, I can't speak to the drones, but I know that STEM is a very big program. I'm sure it is. It's always been, really, in the Air Force and the Navy. And I know it is in the Army from my discussions with people. I mean, it's a very high priority. And I think that will be a draw. But I think it's a draw, but I think the old the reason why our JROTC sells so well is back to the old, I guess you can call it citizenship formula. I still think that's the highest draw, making people, I guess, better citizens. But again, I should say in a more socially cohesive nation. Maybe that would be a better way to express it. I think STEM is becoming big, and I just got some reports from, they held a recent STEM event, and they came away with remarkable results that people sent me some thing. But remember, this STEM event was a very small portion of the JROTC, so it's hard to extrapolate from that small sample. But I think we are going to see more STEM education, and certainly we know the nation needs it. So I think JROTC will go on doing STEM, but as a driver of growth, I think the old traditional things are probably just as strong, if not stronger. They remain the principal buy of JROTC.
Yeah, one of the interesting notes that I got was how much in the early days of the program, how much the teachers and administrators, school administrators appreciated, because it brought discipline into classrooms where before it was pretty chaotic.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that still is a good benefit of the program today.
Yes, yes. And that's why from time to time you see big city mayors still trying to impose a mandatory requirement on JROTC, because I think you're exactly right. It's class, you know, without classroom order, a lot of educators believe you can't have learning.
Yeah. So we talked about one of the low points where they tried to dissolve the program, one of many times where people thought the program could go away. But a notable high point for the program was in the 1990s when President George H.W. Bush announced a doubling of the program, citing its positive effects of boosting high school completion rates, reducing drug use, and getting kids on the right track. Within the DoD, Colin Powell put great emphasis on expanding the program. Tell us a little bit more about that period.
Well, that period was a time when drug abuse, pregnancy, just general misbehavior was much more prevalent than it is today. If you talk about statistics, just in a statistical sense. So they were very real problems, and many educators wanted to address them, and JROTC started to address those problems. But in addition to that, the military was worried because it was being cut by 40% between 91 and 97.
The peace dividend.
The peace. They were worried that the services were losing visibility. Their footprint was shrinking, and they thought that would be dangerous to civilian military relations. They already noted a trend where our congressmen and political leaders didn't have any military experience, and they said, oh, we have to connect with the population. And JROTC was one way to do this. They also wanted to give employment to many of the people coming out of the Army at that time and out of the Navy and Air Force. They needed instructors, and so they wanted to provide employment. There's obviously a lot of people thrown on the labor force in a very short time. So that was one other aspect, but that had another aspect. Not only did they want to give jobs to people, but they wanted to take advantage of the skills and quite frankly, the cost that they had put into these officers to train them, to equip them with all sorts of good knowledge and leadership skills. And so they wanted to recoup some of that investment. Why let them go out in the civilian community when we should kind of take care of our own, not only take care of our own, but use our own? And I think it was Sam Nunn, Senator Sam Nunn, that talked about them being the best role models in the country.
And so this was when a lot of retirees were going into the JROTC program.
Yes. And back then, it definitely, because we were shrinking, we didn't need enlistees. It really wasn't a military program back there in the traditional sense. It was a military program in the sense that we wanted to maintain visibility of the military establishment.
Yeah. in a lot of the different periods throughout the eras, the services, the Army, the Navy, the Marines, all talk about what a drain of resources the program is for them. And so oftentimes they were looking for, they're trying to find the benefit of the program in some measurable way to say what it really provides. And I think that's been one of the challenges throughout its history.
And there's always been a debate. The problem is you can't have an experiment. We know that JROTC cadets go into the military 2 or 3 times more than their classmates. We know that, but there's no way you can scientifically establish causation. So that's
it's correlated.
Yes, there's a big correlation, but it's not causation. So that's a road that's very hard to go down. But I'll tell you, the principals and the people in high schools definitely think it does all these good things.
So we did have a question kind of related to that from the audience, that what is the correlation between JROTC and recruitment? You touched on it a little bit. And does that change between peacetime and times of war?
Yes, they do. Usually in a war, the Junior ROTC percentage of the troops will go up. And that's for a number of reasons. Number one, standards change. And so more of them would qualify for enlistment back then. In times of retrenchment, again, standards change, and that would disqualify fewer of them for enlistment. So there is a relationship between the two. Now, it is odd that, or not odd, but I guess relevant, that JROTC is expanded after every major crisis, after every major period of national attention, either during it and after it. And of course, World War I was a big example. World War II didn't expand JROTC, but they did institute the Victory Corps, which is a huge program that didn't require military instructors. And so, you would have to say military training, federally sponsored military training blew off then. During Vietnam, it expanded, and after the Gulf War, it expanded. And after this last 9/11 incident, it expanded. So there is an example, there is a relationship between the growth of the program and warfare in a number of ways, from a narrow recruiting ASVAB type of way to a larger type of way, just making more spaces for the military.
So I think a former Chief of Staff of the Army noted that schools that have JROTC programs can produce more enlistees, not necessarily out of the program itself, but from the other student population who get more attuned to seeing.
Cadet Command will tell you that enlistment is higher, again, correlated, in high schools with JROTC, even if they're not cadets, than outside JROTC. So yes, the school itself, and possibly the composition of the school, whatever it is, the schools that have JROTC tend to produce more enlistees than other schools. And that's whether they're JROTC cadets or not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's take another from the audience. Will the movement of Cadet Command from TRADOC to USAREC affect the JROTC mission? Is this a reflection of a change in Army needs of the program?
I don't think it's a change of the Army needs, but you must remember that the present commander of USAREC, Lieutenant General Johnny Davis, was the former Cadet Command commander.
He was. Yes.
So I think he is very aware of all the needs and idiosyncrasies of the Cadet Cam mission versus the USAREC mission. So no, right now I don't. In the future, Of course, you can't predict. No one can predict the future. But right now, I think there's a good situation.
Okay. Another one from Michael M. Mr. Coumbe, Dr. Coumbe. Many Catholic schools have JROTC programs, with some having long-standing and highly decorated units. Did you happen to look at JROTC specifically in parochial schools? And if so, what'd you find?
Only anecdotally. I know that a lot of activists against JROTC complained of the fact that in Catholic high schools, JROTC was extremely popular. And according to him, it was overrepresented. So, yes, I think a lot of Catholic schools, especially back in the 60s and 70s, had the same type of, many of the same goals of JROTC. And I would have to agree that, at least for a time, like recently, I don't know, but certainly traditionally, there was a good connection. They tended to embrace JROTC programs.
Well, that also aligns with perhaps some of the immigration aspects of, as immigration, people were coming into the United States in the 20s and 30s.
Yes.
JROTC was very popular for inculcating citizenship.
Yes.
And many of these immigrants were had other parochial.
The Army was a key player in the Americanization campaign, teaching American values, American history, American institutions, American symbols. So I would think you're absolutely right, and I think a lot of them. There's a controversy, as you probably read, in I think it was in California. People said, "Hey, we're letting people in here in the 80s, I think it was. We're leading people in here, and they're not citizens, and it's required to be a citizen." And the answer was, "Well, this is what we're doing. We're building citizenship. They should be in the program." So there was no absolute agreement in the Army, but in the end, they were, because, as we talked about, local influences are very, very influential in the JROTC program.
Right. It is a very local program.
Yes.
Tying Colin Powell to another question here. How do you think he would have felt about Cadet Command now falling under USAREC?
Well, he retired in 1992, and it's very hard for me to say. Now, there's always been a cultural clash. Some people don't want JROTC going to USAREC, and it didn't start out new. In the 70s, the ROTC at TRADOC complained that recruiters were going into the schools and using strong arm techniques to get kids to address, and they were alienating the schools. So that's always been a problem.
There's a tension, a real tension.
There's a tension there, and it's something that has to be resolved from the top down. I mean, it really has to be there, and it's always hanging in balance, because you have. I mean, I can see USAREC's point. They have to have people to fill up the
ranks.
Pool. Yeah, the ranks. There's no way around it. But if you alienate the schools that you're in, then that's no good either. That's going to damage your long-term potential. Let me say, though, that schools are not universally opposed to recruitment. A lot of schools think of it as a career option, a good career option, especially in some of your underserved communities. And so it's very hard. It's like you said, most programs are local. So there's a lot of different opinions. Go out on the West Coast, you might get a different opinion, but in the heartland, a lot of schools basically like it. Yes.
Yeah. Another question from the audience from Douglas B. Robert McNamara wasn't the last national leader to question whether we should have a program. Dr. Coumbe's broader view that character and good citizenship is the foundation of national security is not widely understood. How do we convince those that would say we can't afford JROTC to understand we can't afford not to have it?
The most effective instrument in the past, and this is going to be a very disappointing answer, but the most effective program in the past has been the tremendous public outcry for JROTC. And obviously, if their people support it, congressmen and senators will support it. So I think that continuing to provide that. Now, when military leaders are under pressure and they have to make cuts, that's a hard choice. And anything they cut is going to be bad in some way. So I understand that. But I also agree that this, from my perspective, given my background, this is a very effective program, very, very necessary program. Let me just add one thing here. After World War I, JROTC was a military prep program, but in the main, it wanted to produce people with a fundamental knowledge of military affairs and fundamental military skills. So, not necessarily to go to the Army or even into the reserves, but just be available in case of general mobilization. According to General Wood, it would take 1/3 the time to train a person like that than it would somebody just off the street. So it serves the military in more than direct ways. An enlistment isn't the total measure. So how do you put that across? I guess we just continue to write about it and to publicize it and to
educate
people about it. Unfortunately, that's all we can do at this point. But I think we have a strong base out there in the public, and usually when things get too dire, they usually weigh in.
Another question from the audience. When was the program most popular? How does that compare to today? From my limited experience, because I can't put myself back into the 20s or even the 50s, it wasn't popular in the 50s, or at least it wasn't assisted. But I would say after Colin Powell's expansion of the program in the 90s, it was probably the heyday of the program. And, it basically ran down because we ran out of money. In 1996 and 1997, when we started to deploy overseas and cut our budget. But I would have to put that as the epitome of the JROTC. It hovers right there at the budget cut line.
Yes, yes, it does.
Like that throughout its history. You have shared a bit about what motivated you to record the history, and in the last paragraph of your book, you capture it very succinctly. To paraphrase, you state that an understanding of the development of JROTC is useful to military leaders, civilian policymakers, educators, and other stakeholders to chart a way ahead for the program. Without historical perspective, people are more likely to consider ROTC in the context of immediate issues and through narrow lenses. I'm reminded of the saying, don't take down that fence until you know why it was built in the first place. Mm-hmm. So you do really a great service of explaining why this program was built. Mm-hmm. Can you share any thoughts about what you'd like to see as the future for Junior ROTC?
Well, there's a number of initiatives available. I think they're on the right track with STEM. Of course, for decades now, 4 to 5 decades. I mean, in 1986, they were holding STEM programs in Washington, D.C. to motivate underserved schools and underserved students to go into STEM. And they're still doing that. Now, I think they've refined it. I think it's more effective now than it was then. But I wouldn't give up on this, because even though it might not involve most of JROTC, it involves a significant portion and a very qualified portion of JROTC. If we don't get a soldier out of it, the Russians are making as many engineers as we have, and they're 50% the size. So we have to boost our STEM production. So I think this is a great a great way to do it. And I would, there's a number of new programs in the offing right now that I don't want to weigh into because they're still being adjudicated. So I will keep my mouth quiet at this point, but I think that's a necessary avenue.
You'll do an addendum to the book after those roll out.
and of course, I'd have to, I would favor any expansion, obviously, but whether that occurs again is I mean, there's tremendous support for it, but in addition to support and public acclaim, it needs funding and it needs enough instructors to fill the units. So that's where that stands. I'm moderately hopeful.
One of the questions Brian has, have there been any notable technology advancements among JROTC programs and tracking ROI for cadet outcomes relevant to talent management? Anything come to mind?
Yes, there have been. There was an issue, a program introduced by the MNRA, AUSA MNRA, back in, I think, 2020. But that program is now being adjudicated. So where that's going, we don't know at this time. So there are, and I know, and I'm not only talking about the Army because I keep in closer in touch with them than I do other places, but the Air Force and the Navy have always been on the forefront. And I would imagine, I mean, even we now have cyber units. You know, we have cyber units. So we're also involved in this. But, you know, I would have to dig more to see how effective they have been. But certainly the structure is there.
Okay. Let's see, Christopher. As a former JROTC cadet and now a senior Army instructor of the same program I graduated from, I recall that citizenship development and community relations were the program's hallmarks. Now it seems our programs are measured by the number of Raider, drill, and rifle trophies we earn. When did that shift occur, and do you see a problem with placing more emphasis on competition over citizenship in our programs? That's interesting.
Yes, it is. And I'm trying to think, I'm trying to recall if there is an actual point where that occurred. If there was a turning point where that occurred. I think in units, no, a lot of students love.
Are the students driving that because they like the competition?
They love the competitions. They love the social activities. Mm-hmm. So it's hard to say. It's hard to say. You know, I know for a while public service programs were big, and they still are. But these methods, I'll tell you, a regional JROTC drill meet's a scary thing to watch. A lot of enthusiasm, a lot of schools. It's quite good, and these cadets have been practicing, it seems, for their entire lives to do this. So it provides an outlet, I think, that's very important for that. But
so competitions on citizenship, maybe.
well, that certainly engenders teamwork. But if that occurred, it's hard for me. I know that the Colin Powell days was definitely the citizenship theme was very, very strong, and possibly as well. I'm not going to speculate because it would be without any foundation. But that's a good point that needs to be, if that in fact it did occur, I think that it does deserve some sort of consideration.
Okay. And that's the period where I have two sons that were in JROTC in high school as well, in about this period.
Yes.
So that's what they remember most too, is
yes.
the social aspects of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the competitions. Yeah. So we're getting to be out of time here. I can't believe it's gone so fast. Last question for me is, you've written many articles and at least one other book, A History of the U.S. Army Officer Corps from 1900 to 1990. Mm-hmm. So any comments on that book? And then the follow-up is, can we ask what you're working on next?
Well, the Officer Corps, 1990 to 1999, I think it was, to 1990, was really written from a talent management perspective.
Okay.
How we've managed our officers in the past, and hopefully I provided lessons on, at least things to think about for today as it goes forward. You know, kind of a background to our present talent management program. I've been stunned, you know, with the tremendous quality of the pre-1930 or 1939 Army. It was very small. The officer corps was very small, and people were thoroughly screened. You know, they flunk half of the people out of West Point. If you wanted, and there weren't many, but if you wanted a commission through ROTC, you probably had to be the best person in that ROTC thing. So that's why you have, you know, a lot of people like commandants of the Marine Corps were Army ROTC graduates. They had a tremendous representation because they didn't have a commissioning program. So they turned to Army ROTC, and it was fantastic. But anyway, that's one thing. And I'm working on a number of things now. And one of them is the officer management system.
Okay. A history of the officer management system?
Yes.
That'll be interesting as well.
Yeah.
Well, I learned so much from your book.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I knew so little about the program beforehand, only what I personally experienced, but this really opened my eyes. I just thank you so much for being here today, and even more for gifting us with this tremendous historical document about the growth and development of this large, enduring, popular, and most controversial experiment of military engagement in civil society, the Junior ROTC. Again, if you'd like to purchase a signed copy of Soldiers in the Schoolhouse, A Military History of the Junior ROTC, please click on the pop-up in the bottom left corner of your screen. As we close out today's Noon Report, I'd like to take a few minutes to highlight other ways AUSA supports Junior ROTC and Senior ROTC programs. It provides an opportunity for additional leadership experience. Cadets can be involved in chapter activities. AUSA has 120 plus chapters that support ROTC programs at local levels. AUSA provides national recognition for schools and individual cadets, as well as at the Senior ROTC level, a $4,000 scholarship every year to the DOP cadet and cadet command. That's just to name a few of the resources at your disposal. You can visit the website at www.ausa.org to learn more about AUSA's support for ROTC and other programs. I also want to inform our viewers of a few upcoming events. The next Noon Report will be on 2 December, another book review or a book discussion featuring Rick Atkinson, the author of The Fate of the Day, The War for America, Fort Ticonderoga to Charleston, 1777 to 1780. That's the second in the series that he's doing on the American Revolution. To close out the year, on 4 December, we'll host a hot topic on the foundations of holistic health and fitness at AUSA headquarters here in Arlington, Virginia. On 14 January, AUSA will host a Noon Report featuring Lieutenant General Mary Kruger Izagari, the 46th Surgeon General of the Army and Commanding General of U.S. Army Medical Command. AUSA's Global Force Symposium and Exposition will be 24 through 26 March in Huntsville, Alabama. So we hope you can join us for upcoming webinars and events. For more information about any of these events or to register, please visit the website at ausa.org. Finally, we thank all of you who support us with your membership. Membership matters. You help us support the Army. Thank you again for attending, and have a great Army Day.